Thank you very much. I'm honored to be able to speak with you about the topic of leadership and formation. We're running a little behind, so I will try to be a bit briefer. I'm grateful for the opportunity to reflect with you about this question of leadership, because I think it's one of the most important questions that we have in formation today. As someone was saying at my table at lunch, when we don't have good local superiors, when we don't have good directors of work, everything falls apart. So when we think about leadership, we're really thinking about the good of the body. I want to begin with a confession, which is when I received Mario's kind invitation to speak with you, I was completely intimidated. Intimidated because I am far from an expert on leadership and formation, and even more so because, and I hope my Father General won't mind me saying this, but I think we in the Society of Jesus struggle with this question. We are really struggling with how we form good leaders. We are struggling to find good local superiors, how to form formators. So I come to you today very humble, and maybe without a lot of answers, but with a willingness to share some of the questions that we're struggling with. And I hope to encourage you to share some of the common wisdom in this room in your small groups. I want to begin with a story. About 10 years ago, I was asked to do a review of our Jesuit formation in North America. And at that time, we had created what we thought were excellent leadership modules and summer workshops. They were in topics like a module for basic management and strategic planning. There was a module for future administrators in higher education and board members. We had a whole catalog of these modules. And they were designed to be flexible, standalone programs. And we really thought about them as supplementing our already good Jesuit formation, so to enhance what we were doing. We had really world-class presenters, people from the best universities in North America. We had solid content that was based on the best practices in MBA programs. And when we evaluated our formation, we received very high marks in a lot of areas. But after focus groups, interviews, surveys, everything revealed that our leadership training was not working. Why? First, timing. When we designed our programs, we looked at when formandi had time to do it. In other words, when we could slot things in to an already full formation schedule. Instead of asking, when do our guys need the training? And what we learned is that timing is everything. If a person takes a workshop on leadership but then does not have real leadership opportunities to put the learning into practice, everything gets forgotten. So they learn how to read a spreadsheet, how to do strategic planning, but then if they go back and study theology for 3 years, they're not ready when they become a pastor. So programs work best when participants are beginning or already have leadership roles. And these generic leadership programs that are not connected to mission are much less successful. Looking at timing led us to see a deeper problem, which was our model of design. we were imagining creating stand-alone programs instead of doing the more ambitious thing, which is looking at an ongoing path of integrated formation. When you have isolated episodic workshops, you really struggle to produce genuine transformation because you don't have things building on one another. And what works is when you have a kind of ongoing, scaffolded set of experiences and theory that build on one another across successive stages of formation. And the thing I want to stress is this training needs to be rooted in your own charism if it's really going to be effective. And this led to the deepest problem, focus. When we were first designing these programs, we were focusing on content. What is the best stuff we can teach from the best MBA programs? And what we should have been focusing on was character formation, rooted in our own charism. And why do I say that? Because I really think the critical issue in leadership is not just what somebody knows, but who they are. It's a question of being over knowing. And this I'm reminded of every time I travel around our universal society and I look in places like India and Asia Pacific and Africa at what this amazing generation of Jesuit missionaries did. These guys built schools, hospitals, social centers. Not one of them had an MBA. I don't think any of them took a leadership workshop, and yet they changed the world. And that has really given me pause. Something was in them, in their character, that gave them the ability to change the way the world proceeded. And that's what we need to form. And I think early formation is critical. Why do I stress this? Because if you are like us, we are receiving young men who have a lot of challenges, and I think it comes from being Generation Z. We are seeing guys that are arriving with much more fragility than before. They're anxious, they're less resilient, they have much greater need for therapy. They grew up on screens, and this has produced a kind of superficiality and distraction. They need constant input. They're not comfortable with silence. It's a selfie generation that focuses on the self. Instead of what we want is to get over yourself and get focused on others and the mission. And many of them are coming to us deeply unchurched and without deep roots in the faith. Now, this is not to say that they don't also bring many positive features. They do. But the reason I stress this nexus of challenges is because when we look at the world that they are going to have to lead in, it is daunting. Because what's the global context? We're looking at dramatic changes in climate and how do we care for our common home, challenges of violence and war, increased migration, internal displacement, growing inequality, rising authoritarianism. You all know the list. New technologies, artificial intelligence. In order for our people to navigate this reality, they cannot be anxious, superficial, distracted. They need to be discerning, focused, resilient, strategic. So the question is, how do we produce that? What I'm going to do with the rest of my time is share some questions that I hope can help stimulate conversations not only in your small groups, but I hope in your general councils when you go back. The first set of questions has to do with character formation. So you might ask yourself, how is your early formation helping to develop the virtues and character traits that are critical for future leadership? And in particular, what experiences, practices, and habits are fostering the dispositions of good leaders in your order? Remember, Aristotle says, we develop virtue not by studying, not by thinking, but by doing, by having the right habits. So what are the habits in your congregation that's producing the virtues we need in leaders? And how are you grounding this leadership training in the riches of your own charism? Just to give you some examples from our Jesuit formation, when we looked at our formation, we said there are all kinds of habits, practices in our traditional formation that will produce amazing leaders. A daily examine, annual spiritual exercises, training men in individual discernment, now teaching them to do discernment in groups and discernment in common, living in intercultural communities, as we heard described so well, fraternal correction, being open to feedback. In our first studies programs now, we're having guys do adult learning in diverse collaborative working groups so they learn how to solve problems together. Regular spiritual accompaniment, close contact with those who are suffering on the margins, and missioning to diverse cultures. I'm sure you all have similar lists. But the key is to consider not just if people are doing these things, but are these things producing the kinds of virtues and characters we want? And that leads me to my second set of questions. Missioning to develop leadership. First thing, we need to track how our people are growing across stages of formation. It's not enough to just say, this is the path. We need to invite people to do self-evaluation, to get feedback on that evaluation, and for us to assess, is the growth, are they receiving the graces that they're asking for? And your job, either directly, for some of you, or through your major superiors, is to see, am I giving missions that help to develop that apostolic potential and to prepare future leadership? And for that to happen, you really need to consider a person's long-term trajectory, not just going from mission to mission. I think far too often, major superiors are presented with a program of needs. And so here's my needs, here's my people, how do I match them? And if we mission that way, we can never mission in a way that really develops potential. And that's part of your job, is to really have that long view. I'm inspired by our Jesuit brothers in South Asia because they very early on identify who's going to be a formator. And once they identify people who have that potential, they mission them in their regency and their apostolic experience, how they do their studies, to be prepared to be formation leaders. And it really makes a difference, as opposed to in the 11th hour looking around, okay, who can we get to be the rector of this community? I was talking to some of my colleagues in the Discerning Leadership program, and they told me in the best leadership literature, there are 4 kinds of experiences that foster what they call ego maturity, which in ordinary language means getting over yourself and getting sort of the maturity to care about others, to basically be self-donating. The first is really giving people leadership stretch experiences. In other words, don't be afraid to challenge people. You want to stretch them, but don't break them. Secondly, give people the opportunity to work in collaborative, interdependent teams. And this is more important than ever in a synodal church. So we don't develop these clerical monsters, but really people who know how to collaborate, who know how to listen, who know how to foster consensus. Thirdly, a good practice is to have people be mentored and to have the experience of mentoring. And so it's extremely valuable for guys in formation to have peer accompaniment circles where they can have the experience of having peers mentor them and where they also can have the experience of providing that help. And the fourth one is really facing challenges through collaborative inquiry. And this is something that we're trying to develop, especially in our First Studies program, to let people try to solve problems, not just by going to artificial intelligence and ChatGPT, but going to real people with diverse intercultural perspectives, diverse backgrounds, and solving problems. That's a great way to learn how to be a leader. And I, from my own experience, would just add a fifth condition, which is really close contact with the poor. I think the more we're with people that are really suffering on the margins, they teach us not only how to accompany them, they teach us resilience, and they teach us a way of moving forward in a world that often is really quite difficult. The next set of questions has to do with timing and ongoing formation. And this is just to ask yourself, how in your congregation are you offering leadership to new leaders? When you mission a man to a leadership position, what do you do to help him succeed? Are you timing the formation so that it's giving him the materials he needs for the mission and so that he can put it into use? How are you providing mentoring and peer accompaniment? Some of the best ways we learn how to be a leader is when we struggle and don't know what to do, and we can pick up the phone and talk to the wisdom figure and say, oh yeah, don't worry, think about doing this. But oftentimes, when I go around, our local superiors don't have mentors. Even our provincials don't have mentors. It's on us to be able to create those support systems and to help guys find that accompaniment. And then to really ask yourself, what additional formation is needed as responsibilities grow? We used to joke in the United States about something called the Peter Principle, and that would be where you got promoted to your level of incompetence. So you kept getting promoted until you failed, and then you stayed there. So, and we see that too often. People are very good at a low level of leadership. I'm sorry? La
traduzione spagnola non si sente. C'è un problema? Qual è il problema? Risolto, ok, grazie. Prego.
Okay. So as a person gets more responsibility, how can you help them? And let me just give two examples of what I'm talking about. The first was the Discerning Leadership program that you heard about with David McCallum this morning. I teach in that program. And one of the things that's amazing to me is for superior generals or high-level administrators in the Vatican, they need a different kind of support than they had when they were provincials or superiors of communities. So it's important to recognize the greater challenge and to get the resources we need. And one of the key resources that I find in those programs is the peer accompaniment and the ongoing community, leadership community to support one another. A very different kind of program is a 2-summer program that we have at Oxford on leadership for guys in formation. And I kind of wanted to finish with this, just to say that workshops can work, but they need to be set up the right way. So at Oxford, we don't accept anybody that does not have leadership experience or in some kind of leadership role. We root the formation in our charism using the letters of Ignatius, using the constitutions, looking at a profile of the superior general as a model of leadership. We have people do peer learning, getting feedback. So we try to give basic skills that guys can use. Let me close with this. I think the last challenge is to ask, how are we forming leaders, not just in general, but for today's church and today's world? And that means, how are you fostering attitudes that are really preparing people to respond to synodality, to safeguarding, to become more collaborative, to care for our common home, to be close to the suffering? And you might talk in your small groups about any other items you might add. Okay, thank you very much.